welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. I am your host, Alec Lewis. This is episode 94, recording on Wednesday, July 2nd. The guest for today, you probably know. Her name is Mina. She talks about the NFL on ESPN. She has her own podcast that you can find anywhere. The Mina Kimes Show featuring Lenny does about as good of a job as anybody in the industry analyzing this stuff. So it was fun to get to talk to her about this Vikings team, J.J. McCarthy, Kevin O'Connell, Brian Flores, the cornerback room. We got into all of it. So appreciate you guys being here and think you will really enjoy this episode. As always, we are presented by First Resource Bank. It's a member FDIC bank in the Minneapolis area. They got branches all over the place. I'm in Alabama, in the Alabama studios. Not a branch down here, but I promise, anywhere in Minneapolis that you want to, do some banking, you can find a First Resource Bank location. It's run by Tim Siegley, Aaron Siegley, Charlie Anderson, some great people who care about the community and who love the Vikings. So please go check out First Resource Bank. If you missed it on last week's episode, we made an announcement on a giveaway we're going to do for episode 100. So there's a social media post on Twitter. You like that? You subscribe on YouTube to the show. And then follow us on Instagram, on the new Instagram feed at Alec Lewis Show. Do all those three things. You can win a t-shirt, a Jersey Mike's gift card because we had to do it. So all of the information for the giveaway is in the description below. Couple stories at The Athletic, but this is quiet time of the year. This is recoup, recovery, work on some bigger story time. That's what we're doing. That's why we're here in the Alabama studios. But without further ado, let's not waste any more time. Here is our conversation on the Alec Lewis Show with Mina Kimes. First, Mina, thanks for hopping on the Alec Lewis Show. How are you?
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Thought, quiet time of the year. You're probably still grinding tape and doing daily NFL Live stuff, but why not have you and talk a little bit of Vikings? I'm going to start in a very general spot. Is this Vikings team for 2025 interesting to you? And if so, why?
Well, every team is interesting to me, Alec. Yeah, it's fascinating because I think there's pretty much consensus that the team is fairly stacked on both sides of the ball, and the only mystery, the X factor, is the quarterback. And if the quarterback is, I would say, at minimum above average, this is absolutely a playoff team, a contender, etc. But it's a mystery, right? We don't know. We have not seen J.J. McCarthy play in the NFL. Preseason does not count. So it is inherently very interesting, I think, to everybody.
You've obviously watched this entire offseason play out and this team go from, Sam Darnold signs with the Seahawks, a team you're very familiar with. Daniel Jones exits and goes to Indianapolis and looks like he's in a pretty good position to start there. And then it falls to J.J. McCarthy, and he is, in line to start the season. Like, what have you thought of the arc to getting to this place at which this guy who's never played a game coming off a torn meniscus is the guy?
Well, given that he was a first-round draft pick, first half of the first round, right? It makes sense the way that they have approached it. If they liked J.J. McCarthy enough to draft him where they did, and I think a lot of us really like that pick, we like the fit with Kevin O'Connell's offense, we can get into all that, then it never made sense to me that you would give Sam Darnold a long-term contract, maybe franchise, but certainly not a long-term contract. So I think the way they approached the quarterback position this offseason is coherent with the process that led them to take J.J. McCarthy, and it tells us that they have not wavered in their belief in him. I was interested in it more so from an injury standpoint because, nobody knows his status better than people inside the building. That's something that's unknown outside, and I think the way that they have moved has signaled that they have confidence in him and his ability to come back from the injury. I think veteran depth probably would have been great to keep Daniel Jones. $14 million is rich for a backup. Sam Howell is, you would probably put on the top half of backups in the league in terms of his potential. He's played in the NFL. He's started, before. But it's a bet on JJ. I think we all agree on that. And we shouldn't be surprised because of where they drafted him.
Yeah, you said it, and it leads probably pretty well into the next question. You hear, I don't know, I watch the national shows. I'm always interested and fascinated by the conversation, and JJ has obviously generated a lot of it. Do you feel like, I mean, this is a very classic, like, TV, like, do you feel like there is immense pressure on him, or do you see it as pressure?
Yeah, I mean, because of the bet that they made on him, the truth is there shouldn't be more pressure on him than there was in 2024. It should be about his draft position and not the decision to move on from Sam Darnold. But obviously, given the record that they finished with last year and how good the offense looked at times with Darnold, that adds a layer to this because, everybody knows there's a case study, right, for how good it can be. But again, you shouldn't have to see Sam Darnold playing the offense all you have to do is look at the offensive pieces, the infrastructure, the coaching staff to know that it's, one of the best situations of any quarterback in the NFL. So yeah, that comes with pressure, no doubt. I don't think there's pressure on him though, and like you have to be a playoff team and you have to win a playoff game. I think that's not the right way of looking at it. I think the pressure is more on his individual play and development. And if I'm a Vikings fan, to me, that's much more important than any outcome this season.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And here locally, when we talked a little bit about your colleague, Kevin Seifert, does an amazing job. He and I recently, when I had him on the podcast, we talked about, like, what is realistic expectation? And it's something I've kicked around with a lot of, my colleagues. It's something I've talked about with people internally. But it's like Kevin O'Connell, since he's been the head coach here, each year they've thrown for 4,000 yards and 30 touchdowns with the array of quarterbacks from Josh Dobbs to Nick Mullins to Jaron Hall to Kirk Cousins and Sam Darnold. And so to expect 4,000 yards, 30 touchdowns feels very unrealistic from my standpoint. But from your angle, it doesn't have to be numbers specific, but what do you think would be a realistic kind of benchmark?
I think an above average offense is a realistic expectation for a rookie quarterback. We're coming off of a year where all the rookie quarterbacks who played were pretty damn good. Caleb Williams was sort of the big quote unquote letdown. A lot of that I think also had to do with his circumstances. But you have to, considering the context that JJ's walking into, I think it's reasonable for him to produce at an above average level. First round draft talent. Again, we don't have to relitigate. The funny thing is, I was looking at the Vikings' offensive numbers, and while the total yards were really impressive, they were 12th in pass DVOA, 20th in rushing, which we can talk about. So I actually, this kind of retroactive talk of like them being an absolute wagon with Sam Darnold is not quite accurate, and also obviously, came to a difficult close to the season, which I'm sure also impacted their decision. So I think you want to finish maybe above that 15, 16 figure. I don't think it's realistic, or not realistic, pardon me. Certainly it's possible, but I think it would be unfair to say he has to have a top 10 passing attack immediately.
Yeah, I thought your mention there it's so interesting because of the offensive numbers kind of writ large. It's something I've thought about a lot, like explosive passing numbers and metrics and just the eye. I mean, they have constructed an incredibly explosive offense built around the guy who wears number 18, obviously, but it has felt at times a little disjointed, and in large part probably that is a byproduct of the run game. And you know, because you've probably followed it for years, but I'll never forget after the 2022 season, Kevin O'Connell's first year here, we're at the combine in Indianapolis on the third floor at a ballroom circular table, and he's talking about wanting to improve the run game. And at that time, their answer was to add a one of the best run blocking tight ends in the NFL in Josh Oliver. And then it's evolved from there. This offseason, they've obviously overhauled the interior of the offensive line, but as you have studied the run game, or as you've thought about it, just what is your evaluation?
Yeah, it's not great, honestly. It hasn't been great throughout Kevin O'Connell's tenure. And he does want to run the ball, not in a bullheaded, run the ball for the sake of running away, but he is from the Sean McVay tree, and it is a very fundamental, important part of the offense to not, again, run it into adverse situations, but basically to create run-pass conflict, one, and that's built into a lot of, this architecture of what they do, and then to run the ball into favorable looks. The Vikings face the second most too high in the NFL. You know this. And I think it was the last year with Dalvin Cook, they really didn't run into those looks very often because Dalvin Cook was washed. Sorry. So this last year, they ran into it a bit more, but they still weren't terribly successful. It wasn't awful. I would say, probably in the 15 to 22 range is most of the metrics where they landed. I mentioned they were 20th in DVOA. And that's something that they really want to improve at. I think the investment in the interior of the offensive line is a reflection of that. It's definitely a reflection of what happened at the end of the year, and also having a rookie quarterback and having a veteran center. All of that matters. But I also really think it's driven by an impetus to be better at running the ball when the situation calls for it. And I think that's just an important distinction when we talk about it. It's not running for the sake of running. It's running when we can run because teams are terrified of our, all-world pass catchers.
Yeah, I mean, you said it's 18th in EPA per rush. I looked this up before the show. 16th yards per carry, 17th success rate, and you said 20th DVOA. Yeah, you were spot on with it. I mean, the question that I kind of want to ask you, because you look at it from the lens that you do, is you think about the Kevin O'Connell style offense coming from the McVay tree. Where around the league has proven, who is on the front end of run design, run committance around the league that you feel like could be a model?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, in your own division, you have probably one of the most creative rushing attacks in football. But I'm hesitant to call them a model because so much of what the Lions have been able to do was predicated on having not just a good offensive line, but elite players. Now, that is going to be very much so tested this year because they're changing the entire interior of their offensive line. But I think what they have done in terms of the diversity of the runs, Ben Johnson's ability to alter run game plans based on opponents. I mean, they run everything. You guys know that all too well. And the way he uses motion to displace second-level defenders, create favorable angles for his backs, the way he uses his different backs and has figured it out. To me, that's kind of the gold standard, right? Obviously, Philadelphia also too, but I view that as more just like pure domination. But I would look to the Rams as a maybe more pertinent example because there was a period where they went kind of a bit of an evolution in their run game, going from more of the zone to the duo gap-based scheme, changing their personnel as well, getting backs that fit that. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if we see some more similarities because, Kevin O'Connell's a really, really smart guy, and I think he's going to continue evolving the scheme.
Well, that's how I was asked yesterday, I think. Do you think they will get to the place at which they're, the time on task, to use their verbiage, to use the classic verbiage, like that they'll spend on it is at a level that it has to be for them to be as good in the run game as it needs to be. And that was my response. It's like, I just have too much faith in Kevin O'Connell's awareness, smarts, and just understanding that I'd have to believe at some point they get there, probably in the way that Sean McVay has over time as well.
Yeah, I also really like the back that they traded for, Mason, out of San Francisco. It was kind of quiet. On one hand, I really thought they should just draft someone, but, you give up a late-round draft pick for him. He doesn't have a lot of tread on his tires. He's young. So you kind of look at that as a draft pick with some proof of concept in the NFL. I thought he was really good in San Francisco. The advanced numbers bear that out. And I like the idea of using him in conjunction with Jones. They have some similarities, but some differences as well. So I think that was a good pickup. Jones, he was okay last year, honestly. He was fine, I think, and you can use him as a pass catcher as well. But I do think they needed to add depth, and I like the depth that they added.
I mean, we talked about Kevin a little bit, and you've monitored, obviously, the last 3 years and what he's done. Like, how have you thought about just the job? I mean, the job he's done here. They've won double-digit games 2 out of the 3 years. But they haven't won a playoff game, and they've navigated certain aspects with the cap. And just what is your lens on the job that he has done and just what he is as a coach in the head coach in the NFL?
Yeah, I mean, coach of the year for a reason. He's been excellent. In sort of reminds me of Coach McVay in a way, in that obviously he gets a lot of attention as a play caller, but it also seems to me that he's a superb, like as a manager of people, that might be a huge part of his success that gets a little bit slept on, maybe outside of Minnesota. I don't know anything about his working relationship with Coach Flores, but I have to think it's pretty good. By the way, that's somebody that he should really just throw the bag out to keep if he's not going to become a head coach again. Try to get a little Spagnuolo thing going on with him. But yeah, I love the way I always say this, but I really like the way he talks about football. I've had the chance to talk to him a few times. I really just enjoy hearing him talk. He comes across as very like genuine and thoughtful. But I also like when he talks about the games before, after. There's like a level of candidness and transparency and accountability that I think really comes across. And then the game plans. Like I think he's really, really good at game planning for different opponents. I think he's good at catering or building offense around the skills that the players he has, the quarterbacks that he's worked with in particular. And I'm excited to see how he evolves this offense next with JJ McCarthy.
Yeah, the Flores comedy, this. Brian Flores is such I don't know if a unique personality, but he's just, coming from the place that he comes from and approaching it the way that he does, you always get the first week of training camp, as we'll be out there, Flores it'll line them all up on the line of scrimmage and blitz 8, and you can see Kevin's annoyance as he's trying to install his offense. But I do think I think they have really, really pushed each other. To ask about Flo, because he is so distinct, like what has impressed you the most about watching the way he's called a defense here the last 2 years, coming from Miami with the way they operated there?
Yeah, obviously the thing that stands out the most is just the creativity. I know he's borrowed from college influences with Narduzzi, but also you see stuff you and I were talking about, borrowed from other NFL teams. He's brought back things we haven't seen done at the NFL level. For me, I'll put it this way. What impresses me the most is not like just the pure madness of the scheme, the way he calls different coverages and pressures and marries them together in a way that's very unconventional. Particularly, the pressures are crazy, but it all fits together very well. Pushing the boundaries of personnel groupings and blitzes and simulated pressures in a way that shows up in the numbers and just makes no sense. But what impresses me the most is how well the players execute it. You sometimes see defenses around the league trying to, use this level of disguise, and both in the front and the back end, but players are taking a little bit too long to get back to their spots, or they're not making the right reads, or they're calling the pressures, but it's not working. The fact that in Minnesota, really at a pretty rapid rate, it started working so quickly, I think is a testament to who he is as a teacher. And you have players coming in who have played in other systems, who have played for other teams, and they've been able to execute his defense at a high level. And I think he deserves a lot of credit for that as much as he does for his schematic brilliance.
I always think about it. It's like, with the amount of infrastructure that they have and calls and checks that the guys can get to on the field, how is it possible that it is as efficient and consistent in terms of lack of coverage bust? The first year I was here was Ed Donato, who came from the Vic Fangio system, and the amount of rules and busts, it was wild. I think so much probably too is a credit of the defensive personnel and your Harrison Smiths and your Cam Bynums and your Josh Metellus' ability to intellectually be able to understand and apply. But it's just that ability to be as on the screws as often as they are is fascinating.
Yeah, and it's courageous. You're asking defensive players to sometimes take what would be perceived as risks, I think, for greater gains. Donatel, I mean, I guess his last game was probably the playoff game against Daniel Jones. And I just remember watching that and screaming at my television the way that they played that particular offense. It was the opposite of courageous from a scheme perspective. And so it's just really fun to watch. All of that said, my colleague Ryan Clark and I talked about this a little bit last week. It does also need to continue evolving because you have seen offenses get a little bit better at attacking some of the things that they do. Unfortunately, sometimes offenses in their own division, which is really good. So I'm excited to see what's next for him, especially as they've added some, talent on the interior of the defensive line.
Yeah, I listened to the conversation with Ryan and thought that was great. And you guys talked about the interior and the cornerback room, and obviously the interior and the additions with, Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave, and then the cornerback room with Isaiah Rodgers and Jeff Okudah. My first question, and the cornerback room I wanted to get into with you, but I mean, last year they had the lowest four-man pass rush in the NFL. It was about 50%. My question to you would be, how much do you think rushing more with four will alleviate some of the responsibility of that group on the back end?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can help a lot because so much of what they do with their pressures does create voids that smart quarterbacks can attack. But if you're able to get pressure with four in certain high leverage moments, then you can really turn the screws on the passing offense on the back end because you got more bodies in coverage and there's not as like, oh God, he's running back into, what is going to be a void otherwise. So I think it's not that you have to do it all the time or at a high level. It's just that you want to be able to do it against, I would say, certain quarterbacks too, like really smart offensive really smart quarterbacks, really smart play callers. You want that option to just be like, screw it. We're just going to beat you up front. Or I would say also really, really good run games too. We want to be able to like maintain the integrity of our shell. And so I think having that option is really important. I'm very excited and curious to see what Dallas Turner does this year after obviously being somewhat limited last year in terms of his involvement in production. And I am also curious to see whether or not they get a little bit, either of those two players that you mentioned on the inside return to form. That's the other mystery, I would say. They're players who have been amongst the best in the NFL at various times, but obviously they're both getting up in the years and coming off of injuries. So who knows? But if either one of them, I think, can play at a high level, that adds a component that's really been missing with this Vikings defense.
Yeah, and you mentioned, facing elite quarterbacks. And I mean, you have Joe Burrow, you have Lamar Jackson on the schedule. Like, this is not 2 years ago where it's your Aiden O'Connell in Vegas and it's your last year Joe Flacco in Indy. It is the schedule is a gauntlet compared to what they've seen in the last couple of years. And so to be able to do that stuff against this schedule specifically and these quarterbacks is probably integral. You made the face you did about the cornerback room. For you, how much of a concern do you feel like that is?
Obviously, the scheme protects the corners a lot, and that's been the case for a couple of years. But then there's always games or moments where it doesn't. And the group is not better. So it is concerning. Byron Murphy had a great year. Go Dogs. I like him a lot. But the lack of size concerns me. I'm assuming Okudah's not starting in this scenario. And it feels like I wish that they had added another corner. I'll just say that. There's still some guys out there, by the way. I don't know if they're going to, if there's any interest there. But yeah, I feel like you're leaning a little bit too much on the scheme and the pressures to protect a group that will get exposed against better passing attacks in the league.
Yeah, and you and Ryan talked about, just the amount of turnovers that they generated last year and how much that, statistic obviously and rightfully lifts, how they performed and the standard at which they reached. But it does feel, and you said that, there are players available. At some point, I expect them to seek that group of players and probably dive into that. But it's not like you're dealing with your no-brainers. Let's say Asante Samuel Jr., it's not like he's hasn't navigated injuries in his own right and isn't slighter. I mean, even a Jack Jones, you're dealing with a lot. You know, they're right. There's size stuff there. If you're talking about trading for certain players, they're available for specific reasons as well. So it does feel like similar to the offensive side, in some sort of betting on the infrastructure. Defensively, you're making a big bet on schematic infrastructure as well, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, it is funny when teams, front offices rather, make decisions about roster, how they're weighing scheme. That's the other thing I think the Vikings should just get a lot of credit for is, you can tell from the outside that their front office and coaching staff works hand in hand based on the players that they acquire. Flores, I talked about how he's able to coach up guys, but they brought in guys who are perfect for his scheme. Van Ginkel is the kind of poster child for this, but there's other players as well. So I have to think, the way that they approach the quarterback room has to be a strategy that's been created in part with conjunction with Flores. Maybe he likes, I know that they had Virginia Tech kid who got injured.
Mekhi Blackman.
Yeah, so maybe he I don't know. I'm just saying from the outside, I look at it and I'm just like, ooh, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, Isaiah Rodgers, who obviously played in Indianapolis and then last year was with Philadelphia, from everything I know, Brian Flores has loved him for a long time, really likes him, but even, I mean, I say this all the time here, even if you have optimism, and even if he performs really well, I mean, you're betting on no injuries between he and Byron Murphy Jr.
Yeah.
Or else what happens if one of them gets hurt? And you know better than I do that it's likely probably to happen at some point. So it is interesting. The Dallas Turner mention is a really good one. I mean, here locally, the question is, you still have Jonathan Grenard, who was phenomenal last year, Andrew Van Ginkel, second team All-Pro. So where does Dallas Turner fit in? Is it off the ball? Does that allow you to do some creative thing? I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how they try to integrate him with this defense.
He was decent in coverage in college, if I remember correctly. It's funny because I think Byron Murphy in Seattle, who's their first round draft pick, kind of suffered from the same issue as Turner, where he just wasn't able to beat out some of the depth or the starters in front of him, some of the vets, because they were too good. And so you look at that and you say, well, how much of it is the first round draft pick versus how much of it is just these vets playing at a high level? Truth is, it's probably a little bit of both. But they gave up a lot to get Dallas Turner, so you'd like to see something more out of him this year.
Absolutely. I kind of want to land the plane with the division, and you and Ryan Clark. You essentially, it was a power ranking of all of each team. I thought it was very well done. You guys had the Lions at 5, the Packers at 6.
Got a lot of grief for that Packers being so high.
Yeah, and that's part of the curiosity. The Vikings at 14, the Bears at 18. Just where is your mind on the division as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, that's the order that I'm probably going to land in when I do my NFC North preview. So we're doing division previews right now. Vikings fans, go check out. The NFC North comes out, I think, in 2 weeks. Mina Kime Show featuring Lenny, wherever you get your podcasts. I think the Vikings are probably the hardest team to project because of what we talked about at the top. If the quarterback is above average, then they could absolutely contend for the division, not even jump the Packers. The Lions have some weaknesses and question marks as well. If the quarterback is below average, I feel that they're pretty comfortably third, maybe fourth. This is the great mystery box of 2025. You tell me, what are you seeing out of him? Give me the inside info, because I was going back and looking at my draft notes, on him from college. Even then, he was a little bit of a mystery box because he didn't have that many snaps, obviously. So, I was high on him, and I'm looking at my notes, and they're pretty favorable, and I loved the fit. But, what are you guys seeing out of him this summer? Does he look healthy? What's the level of confidence?
Yeah, I think he definitely looks healthy. There are days where, it's ups. The first day we saw him out of practice, he looked like if you would pause time last fall and then played, it looked exactly like we started to see down the stretch last fall. I still think for me, one of the biggest questions is just going to be layering. Like,
Yeah.
he is and he's talked about this. Kevin O'Connell's talked about this. Like he can throw the fastball, like he can hit a 5-iron, but like, do you have wedges in your bag? Can you get the ball up and over when you have to? And I think it's going to be really interesting to see what he tries, arm angle wise, and if he runs into trouble in that regard. But it is fascinating. It really is.
Yeah, the touch, looking back at my notes, was the biggest question, and it was something that Darnold, in his best moments, did really well last year. Some of his throws over the middle of the field that were layered to the second, third levels, it was just spectacular. JJ loved how he looked throwing on the run, loved that he threw over the middle of the field, which is not something, I have to think that was a big reason why Kevin O'Connell liked him.
Absolutely.
Athletic, good under pressure, played under center, played in a similar, so I liked all of that, but I wrote, I was looking at my notes and I wrote, like, not a lot of touch on some of these balls. And that, to me, it's going to say, I actually feel similarly. They're very different quarterbacks, but Michael Penix Jr. kind of has the same question, who was taken right before him in the draft. And whether or not, I've actually talked to Dan about this a lot, Dan Orlovsky, who I work with. Like, is that something quarterbacks can improve at consistently? And he said, absolutely, something that, I've saw multiple quarterbacks in the NFL improve at that. So whether or not he does could be the difference.
Yeah, and I mean, the last media availability he had this spring, he was talking about it and trying to, he was talking about, working on certain throws this spring in attempt to improve in that regard. Last thing on the division, like, what do you think from this division would surprise you most?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think would surprise me, like, so not that I think will necessarily.
Right.
I would say if the Lions, if the loss of Ben Johnson was like devastating to Detroit, that would be, I think that's kind of the big question mark here. I think the defense is going to be fine, although, I'm a huge fan of Aaron Glenn. I just think the health thing is going to kind of mitigate that. But the offense, whether or not Ben Johnson, that would be the thing. And then I think if Caleb plays like he did last year, I'd be surprised on the flip side of the Ben Johnson move, right? Like everybody, I'm cautiously optimistic. I would be surprised if it looks as bad as it did last year, just because it was such a train wreck of an offense. That would surprise me. But, you never know. We'll see.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you hopping on the show. It's fun to get to do it. I appreciate your time. Know you're bouncing around, so thank you. And to the folks listening, tune into the NFC North preview in a couple weeks. We'll have you on at some point soon. Thank you, Mina. Appreciate you hopping on.
Thank you so much for having me, Alec. You do a great job.
And that'll do it for episode 94 of the Alec Lewis Show. Appreciate you guys being here. Always fun to chat. We've obviously throttled down a little bit because it is the quietest time of the year, and take some time at the pool and all that stuff, which you can obviously not tell if you're watching on YouTube and looking at the sunburn. But we're doing one a week these next couple weeks, and then we'll be back. I mean, training camp will be ready to rock. Probably do more than 2 a week at that time. And so stay locked into the feeds. If you're new here on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you're listening on Apple, Spotify, iHeart, wherever you get your podcast, you can rate, review, subscribe, follow, all of that good stuff. The information for First Resource Bank, our presenting sponsor, is in the description below, as is the description on how to enter the giveaway for episode 100. We're going to, send you a t-shirt, get you a Jersey Mike's gift card, and you got to do a couple things that take about 20 seconds. So find that in the description. That'll do it for episode 94. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we will talk to you guys very, very soon.